All right, so I am going to start with some introductions here for anyone that is new to EP or the Beyond Sleep Training Project, but I'm Tracy Castles. I'm the founder of Evolutionary Parenting. I work with families and talk a lot about sleep, just so much sleep. So I thought it would be lovely to have a conversation with one of my favorite people in the world and who is literally on the other side of the world from me, Carly Grubb. If you know Carly, and she's hopping in and out today. It seems that technology is not our best friend. So she's just going to come in, she's going to leave, she's going to pop back in. And so we'll just flow with it. We'll see how it goes. This is what happens.
Yeah, we are still here. So if it drops, we're still around, people.
Exactly. And I'll just keep talking. And then I'll update Carly with anything that was missed. So, but if you don't know Carly, Carly is the founder of the Beyond Sleep Training Project, a resource that has helped hundreds of thousands now of families that we're looking into, which is insane. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And she's also the founder of the charity Little Sparklers, which is based in Australia. So Carly, thank you so much for being here tonight, this morning, something, sometime, somewhere. You're tomorrow, I'm today. It's all there. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, thanks for dodging all the time zone troubles that we have at the moment between stopping daylight savings, starting daylight savings, all over the shop.
Everything. I am so, and I apologize to anyone that tried to show up an hour ago because apparently I can't do time zones. That was totally my fault, 100%. I have to own it, but there we go. So thank you for joining us now. Works better.
It's very confusing. Like even, I would have come on an hour earlier just to make it easy, but I couldn't because I still had kids to drop off and whatnot. So
it would not have worked. No, and I wouldn't have been here an hour earlier. So it would have been a really awkward conversation. So, so as we get started, I would love to hear, because I know some of this background of what you've done and everything, but how on earth did you create such an immense resource for people in the Beyond Sleep Training Project? Where did this start? How did you find the time, the energy, the everything to do this?
Oh, some of that is still a mystery to me. Honestly, it was not meant to be.
She'll be back, I promise.
Second, I'm back. I didn't start it with the intention to do what it has, but I guess in some ways maybe I did. Like it's kind of what I needed as a first-time mum with a very wakeful baby. But it wasn't like I set out to create the size of the space or the level of engagement and whatnot that we've got. That's actually really happened organically, and I do think that a large part of that is because we really tapped into a need in the community that just simply wasn't being met anywhere else. And we do it well. And when I say we, I mean it's actually the volunteer team who largely run the group and make it the place that it is. So it's very much a we project, and it has been a we project from the very early days. I could not have done it without the team that I have grown around me. And they're all volunteers. The entire thing is volunteer-led, which is just fascinating and amazing. And just the level, I think the other successful part of it is it seems to attract people who are really deep thinkers, very compassionate souls. And I think they bring a wisdom to the space that really actually builds that feeling that people can come to the group as messy and unsorted as they really are, and still see the people around them reflecting that, but also bringing that level of strength and wisdom that you really need when you're feeling quite vulnerable and lost. So for me, I think that's what has kept people in the space. So it's kind of like the need for people to explore their options is what brings a lot of people to us, or curiosity. And it's actually fascinating how many times we hear that people come to us and even a few months in are still deeply skeptical about what it is that we do and the worth of it and whether it'll be something that works for their family. And it's quite often about a 6-month stint and we'll get a message or a post from them to say, I get it now. I can, like, thank you for sticking with me and continuing on while I doubted. Or sometimes they'll say they haven't never even posted. They've just been following along with curiosity, thinking that we were all kind of ridiculous for a lot of the time. But then something will click for them one day. And the fact that they've stuck around, I think that speaks a lot to the fact that there's something inside of us that there's a resonance, even though there's the pull of what society demands from us and pull of what society expects of our babies. But there's something deep inside that's still tugging away where it just doesn't feel quite right. And that natural questioning that we don't even necessarily recognize straight up starts to seep through. So I think that's what it's about.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. And I'm getting the comments pop up for me here, and they're probably not coming right at the right time. I see them come up later than they start. So I apologize that I'm just getting to seeing them now, but someone actually seems to think we're talking about, I think, positively sleep training babies. And I want to be very clear that this is absolutely, there's a reason it's beyond sleep training. It is getting away from that. And that is something, I mean, if you follow EP, I have always been very outspoken and against sleep training. And when Carly founded the Beyond Sleep Training Project, which I came across, I mean, you were already into it. I'll keep going while she comes back. I had actually written one article. I'm saying when I came across you, I'd written one article already. And it was, one of them was about the need for this kind of support and peer support to get beyond, because it is so hard to live in a culture where it seems like everyone around you is doing the same thing. And it was like almost you seem to have, with Little Sparklers and the Beyond Sleep Training Project, created what in my mind, I was like, it would be really nice if someone just did this. And then somewhere out in the world was Carly who did it. But we are absolutely not talking about sleep training babies. We're talking about getting beyond that, not doing it, and needing that support and that mental support, the emotional support that parents don't get when they go against the grain. And in fact, I think we get dumped on even more for not doing this, because it's almost like at that point, if you don't do what the mainstream says, then every problem you face is just your own making. You made a rod for your own back. You've done this. And that's not how we need to be looking at this. There is, we need each other. We need support, and we need to be okay with people following their hearts and their instincts with their babies. And we're going to talk about some of these babies. And one of the things I know that comes up a lot and I think you see it in the group too, there's some awareness, I think, building that sleep training, at least in infancy, is not something that people expect their babies to wake, right? They're kind of like, that's what happens. But then you hit toddlers and preschoolers, and they're still waking. And I think that leads a lot of people to get concerned that they have done something wrong. What do you find in the group? I mean, what's the proportion of it that you see in terms of how common it is for babies to be waking? And how do you see that panic, that kind of anxiety piece in parents around that?
It's definitely a thing. So like we get like large proportions of people who are concerned about their baby from the outset, who just didn't know frequent waking was even a thing. But then you get another cohort of people who are, they have their older babies and toddlers, and they initially kind of settled into the acceptance that their baby would need them at night, but then they really do have an expiry date in their mind for when those needs should stop. And once again, it comes down to society's expectations and their depictions of what toddlers and preschoolers look like in society. And there's a heavy focus on the fact that because our toddlers become more vocal and verbal and have opinions and things like that, that they somehow switch into this very manipulative monsters almost. And so there's a real fear that the waking and the needing you is purely manipulation or bad habits.
Yeah.
And it's like there's like a real disconnect between seeing our toddlers and our preschoolers still as whole humans who have human needs that don't just end because it's the night. And they also seem to also lose sight of the huge amounts of development and challenges our little people face in those early years. And so therefore, of course, their sleep's still going to be disrupted. And of course, they're going to be able to fall back to sleep more easily if they've got someone they love nearby. For me, it's that disconnect. They're just sort of, it's still that push that drove a lot of people to think they need to sleep train their baby. They can kind of handle that for a little bit of time, but then it's like the nagging gets in the back of their head, or they start feeling like if they don't get on top of it now, it's going to be like this forever. Yeah. And so it's like another hurdle that we need to work with families around.
Oh, she's coming.
Trying to bring them back to their child, like their actual human that they've got in front of them, seems to be the thing that helps most people get around it. Because when you look at that little person and really think about what they're going through, it's usually not so hard to understand why they still need you, and that gets people back going again. But you can see that's another problem.
And I will say one of the things, I'll keep going, that I talk to families about who are struggling with sleep, especially with older kids, is that there is a piece to this where it is very normal for our kids to wake. It is unbelievably normal. There's new research out that, I've highlighted on EP about toddler wakings, or they call it toddler, but 2.5 to age 3.5. And the average number of wakings in these kids, this was a sample of a few hundred kids, was 5 that were longer than 5 minutes. These are wakings longer than 5 minutes. So they knew they were really awake. The average was 5 at 2.5, and it only went down to 4 at 3.5. Now, even in these families, these are kids that were sleeping in their own room generally. So parents were not always aware of it. So they actually predicted their kids were waking way less, but their average sleep was way more. So although we have this normative piece, it's incredibly normal for kids to wake and everything. What isn't normal is that we're doing this alone. And that is where I think, you and I have talked about this before, and I think it's so important to get to the mental health of parents, because it's normal to struggle when you're at 18 months, 20 months, 24 months, 30 months, 36 months, and you've got a kid that's still waking regularly and your sleep is still disrupted. It takes a toll. And I think that mental toll goes to both your well-being from the lack of sleep and the struggles and the erroneous expectations that still add up to that. But also, I think it goes to not feeling valued and not feeling that, you live in a world where you're told you've failed, you've done something wrong. And that is so, can we talk about that? Like, I felt like I failed many times, even though have you faced that, even though you know everything?
Yeah, of course. And it's like, I found it, I was actually a shocker, because obviously my first baby was a real challenge, but I had his little brother when he was only 20 months old. So I pretty much had 2 babies. Don't recommend that. But I didn't realize how much was still eating at me until that second baby. And even though I'd sworn that I wasn't going to let people get at me, I still tried pretty hard to not repeat bad habits and things like that initially with him, because I still didn't fully trust that I hadn't done something wrong with my first baby. And I refused to be a sucker a second time round. But thankfully, I found my feet with him. He was a very different baby. I could see these waves. Like, he was very wakeful. I don't breed babies who sleep long. But he was like my first guy, he's total little sparkler orchid, which we'll talk about later on. And it is a completely different ball game. Like, unless you've lived with one of those babies, you really can't fully understand what it's like. But my second baby and my third baby, they were very wakeful little people, but it kind of came in waves, and I ended up settling into it with him, but it still was a struggle between feeling okay with it and wanting some validation for the amount of work I put into my mothering. But oftentimes when you went looking for that validation, it was more like a rod for your own back kind of, you don't actually need to be doing it. Like, I was taking the hard road unnecessarily. Yeah. And to me, that was one of the reasons I started the project, was because I wanted people to see that they weren't alone, for starters. People can do this in different ways, and to help to start see some value in the work that they do by seeing their stories reflected back at them. Yeah. Because there's a huge amount of... So I think that it takes courage to go against the tide, and it takes courage to constantly call yourself back in when you start feeling those feelings of doubt that they don't belong with you. You deserve to be like, I shouldn't have had to do all the things I did alone. And I shouldn't have had to be doubting the value of the work that I performed. That's society. Society did that. There's not actually any doubt at all about the value of what I was able to do for my babies. So I think that it's a big question mark in society for how well they actually want parents to be in the perinatal period. When they also don't really want to do anything practical to support them in the longer term. So it's like if you actually cared about the well-being, the mental well-being of families, you would recognize the enormity of what's needed day and night for families across at least the first 3 years of life.
Absolutely.
And you would not be surprised if that family goes through times of real strain where they're needing some respite and extra support right through that time period. And then because there's usually more than one baby in the family, that's probably going to extend 6, 7, 8 years, depending on the size of the family that's being grown. And it's not any sign of weakness on that family's part that they need help through that period. It should be a given.
Yeah. And, I always think I listened to Meredith Small. I'm sure you know, she's the author of Our Babies Ourselves. She's an anthropologist. If you have not read Our Babies Ourselves, strongly recommend it. And she did a podcast interview once where she talked about research that had been done by her in a Mohawk community in upstate New York. And it was, I think, one of her graduate students that did it, but they were looking at this shared care. And it was, you lived in a house and they had a new baby. So they were observing, there was relatively new young baby who was still waking very regularly. And because they still had biphasic sleep of keeping fire going, someone was always awake. Whenever the baby woke up, if the baby needed to be up, whoever was awake took the baby. Mom just kept sleeping. And it was until mom was up and then she'd be up. And then if the baby needed to feed, they might bring her back. And I just thought, my God, can you imagine every night, just if your baby wakes up, there's another family member, another person who loves them implicitly to take care of them. And this is just so not what we have. And even just then your daytime functioning too, because, it's not just nighttime parenting that isn't, as you said, the whole entirety of parenting isn't valued. But you think about our daytime, we are in charge of all the cooking, cleaning, work, everything. And, when I tell people that are struggling, of course you're struggling. It wasn't supposed to be 1 or 2 people doing this. Imagine having 10 extra adult hands to do everything. And that is, sorry, I'm not sure if you get to hear me when you conk out or not. So
it goes for a minute and then comes back again. So
okay. So I was saying, imagine having 10 extra people to just help with everything. Life, and there'd be a lot of different things. And I get that especially because our lives have been so secularized or nuclearized, we do not have that idea of living in an extended family sometimes seems really weird and off, but we need it. And we need that support, both practical and emotional, right?
I think so. And I guess the thing is too, is people get really like, yeah, but we live in the real world about it. And it's like, but the real world is actually up to us as well. So if we don't think that this is how the world should be, then we need to work to change it. And yes, it doesn't solve the problems of the world right this instant.
Yes.
But nothing changes while we just accept that this is how it will always be. And so I don't necessarily think that we ever want or should go backwards. It's not like we're looking to revert to anything that, people don't want, because a lot of people are like, I couldn't think of anything worse than living with family. And it's kind of not the point. The point is we should be not having to do 24/7 on our own with our little nuclear family and usually more than one child. Like seriously, we are so far outnumbered. We need to get creative about how we can get around that in a more modern way that fits in with people's values and their culture, but without turning this into another individual problem. because it's not an individual problem, it's a societal problem. It's a collective solution that we need to come up with. And if we actually want to keep growing healthy, well, actually, I shouldn't say keep, because we haven't been growing healthy families. If we want to start growing healthier families and get on top of what is becoming the perinatal mental health crisis that's going on around the Western world. And by the way, this is not new. When you think back on the mothers back in the 50s who were supposedly the housewives and whatnot, they were drinking and doing all sorts of things that were coping mechanisms for an absolutely terrible time in their life. A lot of them, truly, maybe they've got some rose-tinted glasses as their babies grew, but a lot of the time, if you get them talking about their actual mothering experience, it was shocking.
Yeah.
And so this is not a new problem, but we can come up with solutions that fit with the world moving forward. The only way to do it is to actually start believing we deserve it.
Yeah.
Put value in the work that we're doing and start making positive actions in our communities to try and see that change. And I do think that in part that comes down to people who are out of the fog. I don't think a lot of this work should be being performed by people living and breathing this time with their baby right now. That is too much to be asking. But for those of us who are out of those trenches, it is on us because we remember it keenly. We know it's not good enough. And so for me, that's a big part of starting Little Sparklers and continuing the work in the project. Because, you know, it could be easy for me to bow out now and say, oh, I've done my bit, I'm out of the trenches and whatnot. But I feel like that's actually where the work begins.
I love that because I think that's how I've kind of felt as I've gone through my journey with EP. It's like, no, it has to continue. And I remember when I started, people would ask, well, you're only going to be interested, well, your kids are young. And then it'll be, and it's like, no, because this is beyond my experience and me doing this. It is something that I hope helps facilitate longer standing changes amongst families. And we need more people to accept that this does need to happen. I mean, you mentioned, I want to go back because you mentioned you have an entire volunteer team on the Beyond Sleep Training Project. How many volunteers do you have? So how many mothers are working towards, because it is generally all mothers, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so just over 100 people. So and they're across the world. We've got, I think it's 16 different countries we've got people in now. And we've got over 100 countries in the group, but 16 different countries where we've got volunteers. And yeah, they've all got various ages and stages of babies. Just this week, we've welcomed another new baby to the admin team. So it's a beautiful process to watch. Like we've got, like people seem to, that's actually another thing that I think offers richness in the group is that there's a whole depth of experience that people are actually still living and growing with as well. So for the volunteers, they're an evolving experience as well. And they're just so generous with their time and so many talented people, seriously. Like,
oh, I know some of them. I love all of your admins that I know. I love them from the bottom of my heart. Like they're wonderful. They're so amazing. And well, she's gone, but I'll continue. You guys are, I know some of them are watching because I can see some of the comments pop up. And honestly,
hi everyone.
Thank you so much for, all of the work they do because it is, and I think it's true. Everyone is at such different stages. And when you have that breadth of people, and what I always love is once in a while you guys post that one at the top about we have formula feeding families, we have bed sharing, we have this, we have everything. And it's so nice to see because I think people get caught when they're moving away from our mainstream cultural norms of sleep. They really get caught up in the idea that somehow you can't do it unless you're insert here, crunchy, bed sharing, breastfeeding, beyond everything, mom. And it's not that. I can say, so many of the clients I work with, I have tons of bottle feeding families. I have tons of families that can't bed share for a variety of reasons. And they're still utterly responsive to their children. They're aware of, what their kids need, and they're working towards making that change within their families just as much as, anyone else is who's doing something different. And so it's so lovely that it's so included there for everyone to see themselves in someone else that's been through it.
And that's what you kind of need too, because that whole idea of the project was to get away from this rigid idea of a formula that's going to fix your baby's sleep so you can all rest. The whole idea was to get people imagining, because honestly, like, you have to do what feels right in your family and in your setting. Like, none of us are there with you. Well, we are, like, virtually there at night with you, but really, you know your baby, and you're their advocate. You're also the one who's living your life. You know where your pressure points are. You know where you feel safe with. And so you've got to be able to, that's the empowering side of it, I think. And we do have people who get a bit confused in the group for a while, because I'll see bed sharing mentioned so often that they almost think that it's like the only way to do it. Yeah. And it's just not. It's just that in our space, a lot of families have found huge amounts of relief in bed sharing, and that's why it gets mentioned so often. But yeah, it is a challenge to make sure people who are newer to the space can see themselves. But yeah, across the admin team, there's a huge wealth of experience, and yeah, pretty much most challenges that come to the group, we have someone who can relate on the team, and that I think's got huge value.
It's just seeing yourself. We talk so much with kids, you know, they need role models. They need to see themselves in people that they look up to. And it doesn't need to be someone you look up to, but when you see yourself, your struggles with other people, it is so validating. And it is so nice to know you're not alone. And it's, you know, I often remind people, you know, whether it's, you know, a client or whatnot, I'm like, half the time people just need to vent to me. They have that hard night. And I'm like, I'm here for that. I can take it. Like, you can dump all of that on me, because you need to be able to. And I did want to ask, one question caught my eye here, because it's actually a real question about, we talked about waves of sleep, of coming and going. And I'm sorry, let me just see if I can get the name. Samantha, I hope you're still here, because it was a little while ago and we got chatting here. She said, does coming in waves mean having periods with no wakings or few wakings? Just curious. I can't remember the last time my little girl woke fewer than 3 times per night, and she's 21 months. And I can say from my perspective of understanding sleep, waves do not mean no wakings. It means there's good periods and there's bad periods. And what those good periods and bad periods will look like are completely dependent upon the baby. And there's no one answer fits all. For some babies, yeah, those good periods are, you know, no wakings or 1 waking a night, and bad can be 3 or 4 wakings. And then there's babies that good is 3 wakings, maybe 4, and bad can be 15, 16, is it the kind of baby that Carly breeds, apparently, that keeps going. And actually, it's interesting, because so much of that is linked, I think, to temperament. And we like to treat, you know, one of the issues with sleep training, and I think, you know, people are being sold that there's some cure-all for, we're just going to fix the sleep and then your life will be better. Everything becomes better. And again, speaking to that mental health issue, yes, sometimes when we get more sleep, we do feel better. We have to ask what cost, though, and how we can try and look at other ways to achieve that well-being outside of sleep training, not putting the burden on our young kids. And that's something that, you know, I always say I would not ask my 4-year-old to start doing our taxes. So I don't know why I'd put the burden of other elements of my well-being in the hands of someone who really should not be carrying that burden alone at all. But when we think about one of these key features of sleep, it's temperament. It's how do we cope when we happen to have those babies that are more wakeful than others. And there's that term for it, the one that I talk about a lot and that we said we would talk about, and we'll get to it now, is the orchid child. And Carly breeds orchids. I have bred orchids. They are, and there's a lot of people that do, and we can talk about all of it here, but they don't sleep really much at all. And so what's normal for an orchid may be far less normal for someone who's not. So I want to hear your first is an orchid, right? Yeah. Tell me about your experience with your first with sleep. Like, when did it get better for you? And I know it varies so much person to person, but what was for you, how it went down?
So he was first baby. So he's actually why we are called Little Sparklers, because he's my little sparkler. I tried to come up with a better name because everyone had such negative connotations, but
Yeah. Oh.
It wasn't that they called him a bad baby. It was more the implication that he wasn't a good baby.
Yeah.
And so it was rough. He was very much that newborn. Like there's an article I'll put up on the Sparkle site that Tracy's written for us, so I'll share today, where she mentions that these babies are the ones that are wide awake from birth. And he literally was, like, the midwives just could not believe this child, like, just staring you in the eye. Like, this is the moment he came out of the womb, like, there was no haziness about him. He was just so awake, alert, tuned into everything. He freaked out by noises. He was so sensitive. But I never met a baby like him, to be honest. So I didn't really recognize what was going on, and I thought that, oh well, I kind of just hoped that things would settle down. And I wasn't too stressed initially, but then I started getting lots of information from people like child health nurses and whatnot to say, because like I'd say that I couldn't really put him down and whatnot without him completely losing his mind. And they tried to get me doing feed, play, sleep routines and putting him down, drowsy but awake. And it was really starting to plant the seed that maybe it was what I was doing that was making him behave the way he did. And as a first-time mum, that definitely started to chip away at me. So while initially I wasn't concerned, the more and more I couldn't make him fit with what they said he should be doing, the perfectionist in me was trying to get things right. And it went really badly, and we ended up in a very bad way. So we attended our sleep school, or they called it early parenting unit, I think they call them these days, in the capital city near us, which is like 2,000 kilometres away. So it's gone again. I was down there on my own. My husband was back in Mount Isa where we live, and it didn't go well. It was a horrific experience. I've written about it before, so I won't go into too much information. But the big thing that stands out for me from so much of that experience was the complete lack of willingness to listen to me about what I knew about my baby. A complete distrust in what I said I'd already tried and knew about how he reacted in situations. It's like they had to see it all for themselves. And like I hadn't tried hard enough, or, like it all really came back to undermining my trust in myself big time, and also trust in my baby. Like they taught me how to tune him out, and to almost like the only way that we were going to get on top of things was for me to be the boss, I guess. And it's an awful thing to think back on. Like, it was so simple in many ways what he was asking from me. He just wanted me to hold him. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be with me all the time. And that's incredibly hard to sustain. And it's also incredibly hard to accept when everyone tells you he shouldn't need you that much. But the fact remains, he just genuinely did. And it was a really hard learning curve for me. It ended with me very much postnatal depression. And it was a very hard recovery, made even harder by the fact that no one seemed to know how to support someone who didn't want to sleep train and sleep train and sleep train, even though I explained how much it didn't work for him. So the lack of depth in the support services around me was crushing. And I know now that I didn't deserve to have to try and recover myself. And I feel very lucky that I was able to do so, because I don't believe that anyone should have to do what I had to do for myself. It's like when you're at your weakest, you really need people holding you up, not you trying to just figure out. But yeah, it became more and more apparent. So this all happened I hit rock bottom around when he was about 6 months. And that's when I started to claw my way back out and start on this path of, okay, so sleep training doesn't work for us. No one can tell me what to do. What are you going to do, Carly? Because he's still your baby. You still have to do this. What are you going to do? And that's where I started investigating different options and started finding surrender and acceptance for the child that I had. And it was a really, really long, hard road because it didn't stop his waking. He woke every 20 to 40 minutes for months on end, and every single night, 20 to 40 minutes, like every single night. And this baby did not settle for anyone else. So I've republished a post that I'd written on the blog back in 2016 about that time and surviving extreme night waking, because not many people actually have to survive that. This is next level. And I was criticized a lot when I wrote about it because people thought that I should have leaned harder on my husband and he should have been taking on the nighttime care. It shouldn't have been my burden to bear. But once again, it spoke to the fact that people didn't understand this baby of mine. We tried to get Dad involved in nighttime care. And when I say tried, it wasn't just a one-off little, attempt. But there still was this distrust of the things I would have done to survive this time. And then it all still felt like people thought I brought it on myself. So being a parent of an orchid and a little sparkler, we've got to improve how that looks in society, because it's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. It has made me a better human. It exposed every weak spot I have, but also all my strengths. And can I tell you, that kid, like, I try to leave him out of a lot of stuff because I don't believe that, especially now as he's growing, I don't want the focus on him because it's his privacy. But I can tell you, he is a brilliant human. Absolutely outstanding. And every person who has ever met him will come away saying, there's something about that kid. And there's just something about that kid. And he was from the day he was born. So it wasn't anything I did wrong. He is who he is. And I finally figured out how to actually mother him. And it was the most intense experience of my life.
I love that. You made me teary thinking about all the lack of support that we have. And I know there's probably some people that are either watching now or will watch this as it's up later who have orchids. And if I may, I'm going to just give a little bit of the why your orchid is the way they are, because I think understanding is so crucial to being able to hit that level of acceptance and share with other people why this stuff doesn't work for you. So first off, orchids, for those that don't know, it is a term that refers to a kind of certain temperamental trait but it's actually, they're a separate phenotype. They have behaviors and biological reactions that are very different from a lot of the population. So there's only, 20% of the population approximately would qualify as orchids. So when parents say that they look around and all these other babies are different, yeah, they are different. And it's defined by a couple things. The first is this very alertness. Babies, they take in so much of their environment. They are aware, they're hyper aware of everything. And I laugh, Carly, because my daughter too, who's my orchid, when she was born, we have a picture that people look at and be like, oh, when was that taken? I'm like, I think she's like 15 minutes old. And they're like, what? Like, I would have gone a lot older based on she's just like, yep, I'm here. What am I doing?
It's like, oh, okay.
Just this intensity that goes right off the bat. And so we kind of have that where it's, there's that awareness of everything, and they really are taking it all in. They take in so much about their environment. And with that comes the idea that they probably see things as more threatening than they are because they're taking in so much more. And the real deciding factor for an orchid and the way they're actually assessed in research is what we call biological reactivity. So when, some kids get stressed by something, their stress levels go up to here. Orchids, it's way up here. They experience stress at a phenomenal level. And that is in part why they are so needy, because the world to them is an experience of really stressful things. It can be overwhelming for them. And so when you think about a baby that doesn't want to be put down, or a baby that needs you to sleep or wakes frequently because they're detecting a noise, a smell, a this or that, and
your knees creaked.
Yeah, right. That is what's happening. So it really comes down to their biology. And they've identified certain genes that are associated with it. So as we know, it's not, you're not just born with something. There is a genetic and an environmental component. But there is so many reasons why they don't do what everyone expects them to do. And it feels like, I always think my current mission, hope, everything is to create a space where the awareness of these orchids, the awareness of their needs, the awareness of the parents who are parenting these orchids becomes commonplace, so that, teachers can understand when you have an orchid in the classroom, it's a whole different ballgame. If you talk to a parent as a lactation consultant or a child health nurse where you are, or a doctor, they need to be aware of the real differences here and what it means. And one of the things that's so crucial, I think, to understand too, is we talk about kids start out. I'm going to talk about stress for a minute. So please let me just geek out on everyone here, because it goes to my next question for Carly, which is about, because as her son has gotten older, that experience of that, not just the first year, but the first many years. Our orchids are, for most people, pardon me, babies are born, they get stressed out by a lot. So like a bath stresses them out. They show strong reactions to that. And they learn to cope through what we call social buffering. So as parents, we hug, we cuddle, we do all of this, and we love them. And then they start to realize, okay, the bath isn't so scary. I can handle this. Now, around 3 months of age, all those dandelions get to this point of what's called the period of hyporesponsivity, where they actually their stress goes up, but it actually lowers naturally, even without that buffering. They actually experience some stress, but it's really minor. So the things that used to make them go up high, make them go to like here. And then when we social buffer them, they drop back down immensely. Their stress is negated. Orchids don't have that. They actually don't have that hyporesponsivity. Their stress continues to go way up. And that is a real problem, because it means that when they are stressed, they are truly, truly stressed. And we know the effects of stress on the developing brain is not good. We go through this, and unfortunately, there's a lot that can stress them out. But the benefit to us as parents is that when their stress goes up and we buffer them, it drops all the way back down. Yeah. We serve as that tool to help them feel regulated. But I know from my experience, and when Carly comes back, I'm really going to like to hear hers too. From my experience, and what I said, Carly, is I want yours after this. It was intense, because I always, you think about parenting as a marathon. I find with an orchid, that marathon is like one of those super duper marathons where, you're not going 26 miles, you're going like 200, and you've really got to look that long term. So when did you feel like, with yours and your experience, when did you feel like you could feel a shift in terms of, seeing, well, I mean, we always see the beauty of the orchid coming out, because it always does start to come out more, but when did you feel like some of that intensity started to wean?
When he was about 2.5 was about when I thought I could breathe again. Okay. I had a 8-month-old at the time as well, his brother. But honestly, he's a bit of a legend. Like, he definitely, you can see the orchid traits all through him still, and he is by far our hardest work in many ways. Like, he keeps us on our toes, but he really started to come into his own, and he's just, I think with he's extremely intelligent, and his ability to comprehend situations is so far beyond his age. So now, like, most people who meet him talk about him being a really old soul. They're like, are you sure he's 6 and not 60? So he gets that a lot. He's still, don't get me wrong, you can still be a funny, silly, like, loves all, those kind of things. But when you have a conversation with him, it's just this next level of comprehension. And I feel like for him, that was for all his struggles and whatnot, he's still a fantastic human to be able to talk with about those struggles. Like, it's very much more involved for him. So yeah, I think from 2.5 was when we started to come up for air. I do think, though, I should say, talking about seeing stress, I know the work we do, we're trying not to have to focus on the negative too much in talking about sleep schools and whatnot anymore, but it would be actually astounding to see research done in these places that have hundreds of families every week in Australia. The proportion of babies they see who are orchids and what their stress looks like in that first 24-hour period. Because for my orchid, I now know that that level of distress he experienced in that 24-hour period actually makes me sick to my stomach to think of. I knew it at the I was equally distressed, but of course, being in the situation I was in, I was being encouraged to ignore my own distress. But putting that little brain through something that he literally could not do on his own, for the number of times that we did, and to watch my trusting baby go from being put down in that cot the first time and trustingly cooing away and calling to me calmly before it escalated, which of course I wasn't allowed to go to him, to the second time we tried it, and literally the second he was placed down, he knew what was happening and he was at 100. Like, I mean, we hadn't even turned to walk out the door and I still had to walk out that door. And to know what that little brain had no chance of down-regulating from that, I think these places are doing damage. And I don't think that they will ever fully understand the amount of damage, because I don't think anyone will ever be able to do the research, because ethically, how on earth could they? But at the same time, I would be fascinated to know what the percentage of babies are in their care that present, because honestly, these are the babies that break you.
Yes.
So of course, these are the babies who are being admitted. And when I was in there, though, I must admit, there was 8 babies with us the week that I was there, and our little neighbour, so he was absolutely classic orchid as well. And then there would have been one other one who I can say without doubt. So out of our proportion, it was 3.
Yeah. And 3 of it, you're nearing 50% there at the very least, compared to the average of 20 in the population. And I think that's it, is that so many of these families that have orchids have the sleep struggles. And, you know, I can't tell you how hard it is for families to cope with, you know, we talk about the mental health component. When you're the parent of an orchid, and it is, you have all the same struggles that new parents have with young babies. You have all the practical issues you're trying to work out. How do I get by with no sleep? How do I, you know, get all this stuff done? Because you still have this idea that I'm supposed to be doing everything, whether it's work or school or cleaning or whatnot, like all of it is expected of you. But you have this baby that just, the intensity of the need is so great. And it is that mental health piece after the fact, when you try modern solutions to the problem, and you don't get anywhere, is kind of what you said. Is I talk to practitioners about this, of the sense of failure that it hits with parents when they try something and it doesn't work, is immense, and it can't be overlooked. And yet, you know, not only now are families dealing with the fact that they feel horrible, but their babies also now have to rebuild this trust again for a bit. And they can. That's all we're getting. But when we go through those, we have this dual piece where we have a dyad where both sides have broken a little. You know, and we need to go back to this. And it's this idea of, you know, we all push this stuff out of this idea of resilience. Babies are not resilient in the way that we think they are. This is not something, you know, and orchids especially are not resilient that way. Orchids are incredibly fragile at that stage while they're growing and everything. And it is, you know, you need to be aware of that, because this is what I mean, I want to rant for a moment, but we need all caregivers to understand this so that they can take care of the dyad as needed, whether it's repairing after the fact or in the moment. But if every doctor, if every health visitor, if every lactation consultant, if every midwife was able to assess and talk about this, and from the get-go, parents don't feel like, okay, it's not me, I'm not breaking my baby, this is who my baby is, I think we'd be doing a lot better. But
well, the other thing that I think gets under discussed is that in many ways I thought I needed to sleep train my baby for his own well-being. Like I really truly did not think I was told by a child health nurse that he was chronically sleep deprived and it was affecting his brain development. And so therefore, when I failed to sleep train him, it wasn't just a feeling of failure and how the hell am I going to survive? It was actually this very deep sense that I was going to continue damaging my child because I could not get him the sleep he needed to develop. And that is a whole other layer of sick to your stomach feeling. When there's nothing else that can offer you to help. And so I actually don't know, in some ways, like I look back on first time mummy and it's like I was let down so wholly, but so was my baby.
Yeah.
Like it's just like, and I think too, people find it really hard. Like people have told me many times and I don't accept it, that he wouldn't remember and he'd forgive me and it was okay. And it's like, no, he does remember. His body remembers. Yes, he forgave me, but only because we did the work to repair. And I still, even though I did the very best I could at the time, I hold no guilt for that because I know why I did it. I know what took me there, and I know I did it with best intentions. I do not deny that it was the wrong thing for that baby.
Yeah.
It was. And that guts me, but I also don't see much point in denying it. And I think people will have this thing where when they're trying to make you feel better, it's almost like trying to allay your responsibility. It's like, don't you worry about that. I know that this isn't all on me, but some of it was, and I am going to do my best to change this for future families because that's what I feel like I owe him and first time mum me.
Yeah.
Because I know we're not an isolated case, and like that's another side of it all is people do not understand the level of destruction these experiences cause, where when you move on from it, in many ways it's healthier just to forget about it. Yeah. And to talk about it is deeply painful. And so this is why you don't often hear the traumatic stories, because it takes too much out of you and you've got other things to do with your life.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I was going to say, I think that allows it to repeat itself, because when people are so traumatized they can't talk about it, the people that are advocating it get to just say, yeah, this is good. This is what we do. This is fine.
And they make you out, like for me, they try to make me out like I'm an isolated case. And they also, the thing, it fascinates me how all of that washes though, because it goes to show how decentralized to the actual process and how obsessed they are with the outcome, that they cannot bear witness anymore to the actual distress they are witnessing in the first 24 hours every single time a family enters their building. They no longer seem to register that because the outcome seems worth it.
Yeah.
And that is one of the biggest problems we have here. The willingness to accept that first 24 hours or however long, it's not just the first 24 hours, but the first 24 hours to me is the epitome of all that we're talking about here and the damage that's being done through the process. And it should not be institutionalized the way it is.
So I want to quickly shift, because I know we're heading to the end of our time here. And a question came up, but it's also something that I'd want to talk about too. We're both parents of orchids. How do you deal with, how do you get rest? How do you recuperate? How do you do, I mean, I hate the term self-care, but it's real, like we do, but not like take a bath. I mean, although that's really nice to do once in a while too. But you know, what what did you do yourself to kind of give you that space, particularly in those really hard moments of that very frequent waking and everything like that?
So I've actually, I've reposted an article I wrote about the extreme night waking. It's up on the Sparkler site. I'll share it later on for everyone. And it gives you my top tips on things that I tried. And I was going to rewrite it, but I decided to leave it because I feel like it's a bit more raw and real from what I was still feeling at that time. But honestly, so lowering expectations is one thing, but it's also the fact that for me, a big part of my mental improvement came from the fact that when things were tough, I kept reminding myself that they really were tough and it really would have been tough for anyone. And that helped me keep myself in perspective and stop some of this spiral of beating myself up, because I could give myself that reality check. But I also did lean hard on things like the weekends. My baby was an early riser, and so that was Dad's job. Like, literally, and we had an agreement. It was like the first stir from that child, because like once I was awake, I couldn't get back to sleep. So it was like first stir, kick Dad, you're on. And he'd take him out and I'd sleep for another couple of hours. That was one of my ways. Another way was I did do a lot of, I'm very lucky. My mum's amazing. And I flew her in and flew down to her for respite when things were getting to crisis point. And I did it a lot. I have no shame about it. I still remember I'd get there and literally look like a shell and just hand the baby like, and I still did every night, because even with Nana there, he adored Nana, but Mum was still Mum at night. But finding someone who loved him as much as I loved him really helped, because he was intense. So Nana would lump him around on her hip. She made herself a carrier just for my baby, like, which actually reminds me, my mum had made herself a carrier when I was a baby, because I was a koala. I was a very settled koala, but I was a koala baby. And she'd actually sewed herself a little, so baby wearing apparently was in my genes. I didn't know until this baby came along, and Mum made herself a sling with him. So those couple of things were definitely ones. I got a cleaner because I was going absolutely mental at the state of my house. And honestly, trying to get out, because I got in a really bad rut of staying in and avoiding people. And it was I had really bad insomnia. That was another side effect of being depressed, was really bad insomnia, which is really cruel when your baby's asleep for 40 minutes and you can't even sleep in that time because you got insomnia. But I found getting out helped with my insomnia. I needed to get the sunshine. So even if it was literally going and sitting on the grass in my backyard, like, we're lucky that we have that. I know not everyone can do these things, but the sunshine helped. Starting to take light walks with my husband in the evening, because my baby evenings, you're just done. But I was finding I wasn't talking to my husband anymore, because I'd get to the end of the day and I was just so cranky and done, and I didn't want anyone touching me or talking to me. And we started. And I think, that light exercise, the calm of the night air for my baby, the actually getting to talk to my husband, all of that had a positive impact when I was going through my really tough times. And I know when I'd get back in funks again every now and again, and I'd be refusing to do these things. My husband would be like, right, tonight, walk. We're doing it. Because it was really hard. I can't tell you, there was no easy shortcuts, and I can't say I was a stunning human every day, because I sure as hell wasn't. But I did it, and I'm really proud of myself, and I'm really proud of my baby, and I'm really proud of my family. Like, we did it. And sometimes the hardest stuff's the most worth it. And there was no shortcut. There's no easy way out. There was nothing I could have done to make it easier, apart from the fact that I accepted that this is who we were and the cards we were dealt, and we did it. Got on with it.
That's beautiful. I think you highlighted a couple of pieces there that I always tell people when you're working with an orchid, being an Orchids parent there, there's always one or two areas that seem like the worst, right? And it may be the cleaning, it may be the getting out, maybe some, whatever it is. I know for me, it was the cooking. The thought of prepping, it was, no, I don't have that in me anymore. And we ate out way more than ordered in, way more than we should have. But it became, well, that's what's worth it, because my sanity at that point was, nope, everyone's happier if we just order in and get stuff for, a couple meals, and then I don't have to think about it.
That goes to the whole, actually, that's another big part of the mindset, was it really is not forever. It's not a short-term thing, so you can't sprint and run your way out of it, but it really won't be forever. So things like eating out, or hiring a cleaner, or leaving, you didn't wash your bed for 2 weeks, or whatever, that doesn't mean that that's now you and your life and how it will always be. There is no forever. There's no forever in any of it. It will always change. Whether you do something about it or not, it will always change. And that was another thing I had to get in my head. This is what we need right now. What do we need right now? Let's deal with that. All the other stuff will take care of itself over time. Yeah.
And whether that's there was a post I shared recently on the no rules with the dishwasher.
Yes.
The person shared, if you haven't seen it, it's on Facebook page. It's brilliant, because the idea is there are no rules. You don't have to rinse your dishes first. If you need to, run your dishwasher 2-3 times. The amount of times when I had my orchid that I would forget that I'd done the laundry and not switch it to the dryer. I mean, and you just accept, well, I'm running it again because I open it up and it stinks. It is now gone moldy.
Oh my gosh, maybe this is an orchid family thing. The laundry was the bane of my life. I can still smell the smell. I was talking to Amanda Donnett for her thing the other day, and I was talking about laundry.
Right? Ugh. The best thing we ever did, you know what I have now? We have an all-in-one machine. It takes way longer, but I don't care. It can take 5 hours. And it uses steam to dry, but I put it in and then I forget about it. And 2 days later, it's still dry on the inside. It is my favorite thing on the face of this earth, because I just don't do, the amount of times I still would end up just redoing laundry 5 times because I forget about it.
We live in 45-degree heat, so it just goes absolutely stanking. But the other hard part is when you got a baby you can't put down. It was so hard for me to actually hang it out.
Yeah, that's putting it away, folding it with a baby that wanted to be cooking. I felt unsafe having my baby, because my girl would not leave me, and I could never get the back carry going. That just baffled me. I think I would have dropped her on her head there drying it. So she was always in the front. So it was like that whole, those things that were inhibited by my arms being not really able to do things that were just hard. It was just.
Yeah. And I think that's some of the stuff too, where it's you might look at other families who are achieving they're baking and their kids have got this and that and whatever else is going on. Their house is spick and span. You actually can't expect that of yourself when you have an orchid, because it's actually just so unfair on you and your baby. Yeah. You're actually doing really important work, and it does take the vast majority of your time. And it's okay when you get those moments of downtime to just rest.
Yes.
Seriously.
Do something else. Relax. Yeah.
Contact napping became a really good thing for me. I felt like that was my other way that I survived, was because this guy needed me to rest. And so I rested
too. I know. I would put on shows while my baby napped. It was this was my time to I'm lying on the sofa and I'm just vegging. And it's lovely until you need to pee. Then you're like, oh crap, I can't move, and what to do there.
My early blogging and things like that was written with a baby on the boob sleeping and my orchid on my legs asleep during lunchtime naps. That's when I wrote. I just sit there, and actually writing was super therapeutic for me.
I loved it too. A lot of EP started with my daughter. The early articles were all done with her napping, typically on me or on the side. Sometimes she might roll off me kind of on the side there, but that was, still on. I'd type away. It's also how I wrote part of my dissertation. Was, I would have those times and be like, all right, and run from there.
I think that's really healthy too, because your body's still at rest, but it doesn't mean your mind needs to. I found it so satisfying to be able to communicate especially at the time when I was feeling really misunderstood amongst people that I had in my real life. It felt so nice to write in a way where it's like, I'm not actually trying to talk to them. I'm trying to find some people like me who maybe they need to hear that they're not alone too. And so that's where I started writing for that style of things too. And it was nice. It was using my brain just for me. Yeah, I was talking about my babies, but I was talking about it in my way. And it was peaceful for my body. I wasn't doing anything strenuous. So yeah, I loved it.
Now, I know we're coming out, we're past our hour here that I've kept you. And no, that's fine by me. I'm happy. I could talk to you for hours. We could be here all day. But at some point, I think people need to go. I wanted to quickly, first off, you mentioned that article. It's on the Little Sparklers, or is it on the Beyond Sleep Training?
I'll put it in both. I'll post it up. So we've got your beautiful guest article for us that's talking about temperament and sleep. And I've also reshared, because when I was reading that yesterday, it really brought back all of your and I was like, I reread that article. I'm like, I'm going to rewrite that. And I'm like, no, you can't. It's too far past. You need to post it as it was. So I'll put those up as well for people. And a massive shout out to anyone who's living with an orchid right now. You're doing brilliant work.
Yes, you are rocking it. It is. It feels like you're doing nothing. And yet, here's the thing about these kids, though, is that they are so dependent. Their well-being is dependent on their environment. And so as a parent, when you are parenting an orchid, what's unique about parenting them is that when you see them later, you did that. That brilliant baby, that amazing empathic old soul that many of them become. And this is the research on them. They're called orchids for a reason. They flourish and they're beautiful when given the right environment. There's the flip side when they don't. But this is the motivation to do it, to have that time with them. And then you get to look as they're older and be like, wow, I survived. And look at them. Like, that little person is amazing. And it's in part, I can actually say in part, because of what I did. And that's really cool. So that work.
So well. And it can feel like it's all self-sacrifice, but it's really not. I promise you, on the other side, you will have grown and learned so much about yourself and found depths of courage you didn't even know existed in you to be able to get through the experience. So this is far from a one-sided benefit process as well. You're doing so well.
It reminds me, there's a quote I found once somewhere, and I can't remember where, unfortunately. So I can't attribute it to anyone or anything, but I thought it was like a Buddhist belief. But I might be wrong on that one. But the quote was, you aren't given the baby you want, you're given the baby you need. And when we have orchids, sometimes it can be like, wow, you really wanted me to work on some shit, didn't you? I was not.
You wanted to break me. That's what I was so.
It's like, wow, I really have a lot going on that I got to work on here. But it's true. I mean, I am a completely different person than I was pre-orchid. And my ideas about things have shifted. It is. And I love who I've become way more than, I mean, there's elements that you might miss. Like, I was super productive, everything, all that stuff, that all went away. But I'm like, that was probably the recipe for a heart attack at 50. So, in many ways there's like, okay, this may work out long-term for my benefit of, mellowing out, letting go of things I can't control has been an immense lesson to go. And I think, what Carly said, we all do. So before we go, Carly, what do you need for Little Sparklers? Because you are working, and you guys can go, Little Sparklers has a Facebook page. They also have a website. You can read all of the amazing stuff, and you really have to go check it out, because this is like ground level, pure support, charity, working to help moms like you, parents like you. It's not just moms, it's all parents. And it's so crucial. So please tell us, what do you need? What can we all do?
Well, Little Sparklers, so for starters, please share information as far and widely, link things back to us. Make sure your friends who are having new babies get the lowdown on what they can expect from a baby. So a huge part of what we're doing is trying to raise that awareness around what families can expect, have more realistic expectations, but also society for families. We're always after donations because, like I said, we're entirely volunteer run. we grew at such pace that in many ways the project is hugely unsustainable. So we're working in lots of different ways to make us more sustainable and be able to move things forward more rapidly. So things like sponsorships, donations are always welcome. If you go to our site, we've got a section on ways that you can help us out there as well. And also, if you're not a part of the Beyond Sleep Training Project, come and join the.
Oh, she's coming.
And that's not just if you're in the sleep trenches yourself. We really value having people in the community who are further along their journey, because that's where the wisdom and depth comes from, and also the strength and patience that's required to help people through when they're at the beginning of their journey, because they're very vulnerable a lot of the time. And if you're also feeling vulnerable, it's hard to support other people other than offering some solidarity. So we rely very heavily on having people at all stages of their journey to make it work. So they're the main ways, and just making sure to being really great models in your community too, being honest with those around you about how your baby sleeps, where your baby sleeps, how you're feeling about parenthood, priorities, values, and asking for support. So, there's just no shame in needing assistance to raise your child. It's actually what we all need, and it's not a sign of not coping. So they're the ways that you can help us most, I think.
I love that. And I just want to add, I sometimes, I hop on to the Beyond Sleep Training Project and we'll see certain threads. And what Carly said about going and offering support and help, it's so nice when I can read a question and I open it up and I'm like, oh, great, perfect. They've nailed the answers. That's great. I'll move on, look at something else. Because that support there is so valuable for people to hear it from multiple others that have been there. So it is such a great way to do it. So please, everyone, go check out Little Sparklers. Check out the Beyond Sleep Training group. Donate if you can. And please, take care of the babies. And if you meet someone who has an orchid, tell them it's okay, that they will get through, that everything's normal, and that little baby just needs them.
And make them a coffee. And dinner.
Unless you happen to be someone who has an orchid who can't handle the caffeine because it sends them into a complete haywire.
I actually went through, because we did an elimination diet with, as part of the making sure there was nothing underlying for this orchid child of mine. And I was the most relieved I've ever been when he didn't react to coffee. It's like, because that was the other thing powering me.
I'm jealous. I'm back to coffee. Both my kids, I think, and there is research that the half-life is so variable that, some kids, and those were mine. Yeah. They do that. Oh, man.
They're probably the adults who have one and buzz.
I think so. Yeah. Like, I'm scared for them to ever have coffee. I'm like, I just don't think maybe you should. I am.
That on the low.
That's for now. All right. Well, as soon as she's back, we're going to say, you're back. All right. So I just want to say goodbye. I know, come back to say goodbye. But thank you so much, Carly, for coming and chatting and sharing your story. And it is heartbreaking and yet so needed for people to hear that. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me on your morning, Wednesday. What day is it today? Tuesday?
Tuesday morning.
I've lost track of days. I no longer know where I am or what's happening. So,
well, thank you to you, because you were a big part of changing my path as well, because you just broke it down for me. You can make sense of it. It's like, why does this stuff seem like everyone's talking about it, but it didn't work for us? And I think it was some of the stuff I found on your site that actually reassured me that I wasn't actually damaging my child's brain. So thank you.
Good.
That was, there was very few places I could go at the time for any kind of. Thank you. Your work's really important.
Oh, thank you so much. And yes, let me just close on, you're not damaging your baby's brain. Let's just go, and I can go into way more depth on that another day, but you're not damaging your baby's brain. Especially not when you have a baby that's super happy during the day and thriving, which a lot of orchids do. They're happy when they're on you and thrilled. And
it's kind of funny. My mum actually said, after the child health nurse had told me that about my baby, and she's like, wow, can you imagine if he was actually sleeping? You're freaky smart. I still remember it, but I hadn't kind of connected the dots. Like, he was clearly not struggling in the development department, but anyway.
But that's exactly. So, I mean, we can talk about it, but thank you so much. Thank you guys for listening, for your comments. We'll go back and take a look at them after. I hope we've been able to answer a lot of the questions that you guys have for everything.
We'll just have to do another session.
We will. I'll keep doing this. Now that I'm figuring out the technology, I'm not as scared of it as I usually am, because I'm so technologically inept. So we will definitely be doing this again. I will drag you back, kicking and screaming. All